I think that is probably one of the things for me as a writer that I had to learn to do. I could start things all day long and I could tweak them until it was probably getting worse before, you know what I'm saying? I had tweaked it so many, I have files and files and files of things that I have started, and I have edited the absolute life out of them. But I've never shown them to anybody because I would have to then admit, like, this is an effort that I did my best on.
Yeah.
Because if it wasn't good enough for someone, then it was somehow a reflection on me.
Yeah.
You know, and I think as a creative person who has to finish things, you know, my livelihood depends on landing the plane, you know, and to live with the reality that done is a really important thing, and it's better than perfect, because done helps somebody get your story into their hands, and perfect means you're never going to get that thing in print and hand it to someone.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Daron Earlewine Podcast. We're sitting down with part 2. My good friend Emily Sutherland, who was just an amazing co-creator for the book, The Death of a Dream. It's coming out October 18th. Wherever books are sold, you can pick that up. And Emily, last time we sat down, we talked a little bit about kind of the creative process that you lead people through, the creative process you led me through to really get to the place of believing this was possible. We talked a little bit about the storytelling course that you have at emilysutherland.me. If you haven't checked that out, do it. Today, I just want to unpack and kind of maybe this is kind of the behind the scenes episode, if you will.
There you go.
Of creating this project. And right now, there may be people that are like, Daron, we're so freaking tired of talking about your book. I'm sorry. All right. First time I've done it. It's
sorry,
like
not sorry.
Okay, sorry, not sorry. We're going to talk about it. But what I hope that we can do by unpacking this part is hit a little bit more on how much teamwork can make something, work, how important that is to have a community of people around you to help dreams come true, and just kind of the creative process that we went through. Because the interesting thing about our partnership, and we hit this a little bit, is we were connected through your husband when I was a college kid. But as we began to partner in this process, it was crazy to see how, in a lot of ways, we had kind of lived parallel lives as far as a lot of our life experiences, which I know for me, as we would sit down, even before I started writing it, as we would sit down and I would just tell stories and brainstorm and things like, you understood me because you had lived similar, like I said, a very parallel life, which I think that's so cool to see that not only is teamwork so important, but like that God is there's a great chapter in the book called Woven Not Wasted, right? Where he is weaving together even relationships that you don't even know about that will make a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I used to move a lot, and both of our dads were pastors. Yeah. So that's something that I related to about your story. Yeah. And we moved a lot, and I can remember kind of almost having this sense like, am I even going to know the people that I know in 3 years? Because we're probably going to live somewhere else, or, and you just for a long time forgot how important it is to connect with people, and it's a very lonely way to live. It's a very isolating way to live. And I think, when we moved to Indiana, we decided we're going to put our roots down here. We were going to know people, and we were going to allow ourselves to be known. And we didn't know that when we moved here. We discovered the need for that. And we knew that we needed to put down roots. And I knew I didn't want to be moving a lot, but I remember over time really having this shift of like, oh, these people are going to be, anybody that I meet is here for a reason, and even the people I had met years ago in all of these places that we had lived, there were certain people that would still, our paths would still cross, we would still connect. And I think as I grew more mature and, spiritually and creatively even, you realize that as you grow, every relationship in your life shifts with that growth in some way. Yeah. And so I think your growth and my growth allowed us to be able to be in the same space with this project and with your story.
Well, and I think another thing about it too is, and we talked about this in the first episode, is, anything in this creative vein, it is so personal, especially for me. Like, I'm literally telling, my life story alongside, Joseph's story from the Old Testament and trying to connect with people's lives. And it's very personal.
Right.
And so what I don't want, a listener to hear is like willy-nilly invite anybody into your life. Don't just give anyone access to some of the most vulnerable parts, or, maybe into a very personal, vulnerable project. And for me, some of the early times that we talked, and I can remember a conversation where I think we went to breakfast and it was just like, hey, let's talk and let me see, like, do I feel like I can trust you with this? And do you feel like you can get inside of this story? And by the end of the breakfast, we were like, yes, absolutely. But I think that breakfast was important. And I think that is important for us to see that, like, being able to have, I guess, spiritual but mature enough lenses to be able to sense, is this someone that I can trust, that I can bring deeper into this process?
Right. And, without even realizing it, every conversation that I have with somebody who is interested in their story being written, there is a certain, there are certain stories that I feel like, I could do that. Mm-hmm. And there are others that I want them to write their story, but I know that I can't be the one to do it. Mm. And that was the conversation I was having with you. Was, I know this is a good story, and I know that the fact that it's in you to tell means that you need to listen to that. Mm. But am I the person to tell it? And I can remember asking you some tough questions, because where I am spiritually now, after being through all that we went, the different journeys that we went through. Mm-hmm. There were certain questions that I needed to know, like, because I value authenticity and I value not putting a bow on things that, weren't okay. And I remember us having some conversations where, we had to kind of hash through, am I going to be expected to write this in a way that negates someone's pain out there? Or, I just remember us having several things that I needed to just know we were going to be able to be in the same space on. Yeah. That I was going to be able to have the lens and the voice that shared the story you wanted to tell, rather than me projecting my story into it. Yeah. Because it is such a personal process that, I have to be able to tell the story in a authentic way and, like, put myself in your shoes. Yeah. But there's a internal line for me that it can't be my story that I'm writing. Yeah. And sometimes if it's too close, I'm, like, very tempted to write my story. And so that was an important conversation that day, I think, for both of us.
Yeah, it was. And it, it set the process up. And we had some conversations about where you kind of led me through, okay, when someone walks away from the book, they close it. Like, what's the feeling you want them to have? What do you want them to walk away saying? I was telling you before we started recording, like, some of the feedback that I'm starting to get is, people are getting advanced copies and whatever. Like, I'm starting to hear some of that.
And they're saying what you wanted them to say.
Yes. Which feels phenomenal. Like, wow, we really did it, I remember a moment, right towards the end, I was proofreading, some chapters and doing some editing with it.
Which you were loving, and that was fun, wasn't it?
Well, sort of, kind of. But I did it. And I remember having a moment, and I don't even know what chapter it was, but, like, I love reading. I love books, and I love moments when I feel like God meets me in the reading of a book, mm-hmm. and it's this moment of, like, wow, like, that spoke to me, or I never thought of it that way, or, like, it's just, one of those moments. And I don't know, I was probably, an hour, like 3 of reading through, chapters, and at some point I kind of forgot I was reading my book, and I felt like kind of God met me as I was reading. And it was like, that was one of the first moments where I thought, I think this is going to help people. Yeah. Because if I had a book moment reading my own book, because I forgot I was reading my own book, I was like,
I love that.
Okay. Like, I think, God's going to meet people on these pages. And, and I love that we were able to do that together. And the process, we've talked about it a little bit, but just, kind of give you guys, like I said, this is the behind the scenes deal, is we had done this pre-work, and then, you gave me the keys to the kingdom to say, go write a 17-week sermon series. So, I worked on that for a couple months, got planned out what I was going to do, and booked a small casita, I think it's called, in Arizona, a little cabin out in the desert, because I was like, I need no distractions. I need to be by myself. Like, this is, I think, a place. And I think, like, I haven't talked about that much, but I think that's also important to know what kind of space you need to be creative in.
Absolutely. I think that you made a really good call there, because you said a lot of my story took place in this area of the country.
Yeah.
And you got to see old friends while you were there in the evenings and things. And that brings up new memories that you may not have triggered, if you had just been in your lounge chair in the living room,
Yeah.
So I do think place is important. And we talked a little bit about that in the storytelling school, school that you attended, like know where you're going to do this and make sure that it's inspiring to you.
Yeah.
That was a good move.
And it was inspiring. I mean, the last chapter, I won't steal it from you if you read it, but the most powerful God moment for me in this process was literally, it's in the last pages of that last chapter. And it happened within 15 minutes of me getting to that cabin. Like, I'm not going to get emotional on the podcast today, but it was a moment, and it was so beautiful that God would meet me the way he did out in this patio. I'm not going to tell the story because you got to get it by the book for you to read it. But God met me, and it was like in those first 15 minutes of being there, like him saying, I'm here, and like, we're going to do this together, was such an affirming process. But I went out there and I told myself, okay, like, you have to give yourself some discipline structure. And the only context I had to know how to do this was that all the years I've spoken at camps.
Okay.
And so in my brain, I was like, okay, I have a service at 10:30 and I have a service at 3:30 is kind of what I did in my brain. So I knew where I was going to go. I'd wake up in the morning, get a cup of coffee, watch the sunrise. And in the cabin I had, it was so cool. They would launch hot air balloons like in the morning, sunrise and sunset. So I'd wake up to hot air balloons, right?
Lovely.
It was amazing with my coffee. And I'd be like, all right, you have till 10:30 and you take the stage, right? And would prep it, get it where I wanted it to be. I hit record on my phone, and I'd just sit there and preach into my phone. Get that done and be like, okay, did I capture everything that I would want that to be, if that's chapter 1 or whatever.
Right.
Then I grab some lunch. Usually I would do some more prep, go for a walk through this neighborhood down this hills where I was at. And I'd practice that next chapter / sermon for that whole walk, come back, prep some more, and then deliver that one. And then once I got rolling, like I went out there and I was like, if I could get 6 chapters done, 6 to 8, I'd feel like this was worth it. And I think by the end of it, I sent you, I think there was something like 13 or 14 chapters. And so I'd record them. We hired a transcription service, upload it to the transcription service. Literally within a couple hours, I had it back to me. And like, it really started like rolling in a way where I couldn't believe it that I got that much done. But the interesting part was then, so sent all that to you, came back, you said, okay, give me a couple months, or at least a month or so to start reading through, kind of working through. So I don't know that we've talked a lot about like, when,
what did I do?
Yeah. Well, so it's like, I remember you got about 3 chapters, massaged and put together and sent it back. And it's like, okay, read this. Does this sound like you? Do you feel like this is what you said? And am I representing it? And we had to make some tweaks and stuff there and there. But I guess, what was it like to get like 14 and like you like, and I didn't.
Oh, it's like drinking from a fire hose. I'm not going to lie.
And oh, wow. And I didn't realize like how many words I would say in a 30-minute, sermon.
Sure.
But way more than a chapter in a book could contain.
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate in that you are a speaker who is heading somewhere, and you are a storyteller, because not everyone's sermons could just go into book chapters without feeling like you're being preached at or like almost assaulted as a reader. But I think you were a good storyteller who had a point, and I think that helped a lot with the process. And a lot of my work was creating. So instead of sitting in an audience where you're speaking and I already know you and I already know I'm signed up to hear what you're going to talk about, I'm putting myself in the shoes of a reader whose aunt maybe gave them this book, or their friend was like, oh my goodness, I know your story a little bit. I think you would enjoy this story. The death of a dream is something that a lot of people face, and that this book was going to be in the hands of some people that maybe wouldn't have sat in a service where you were speaking.
Yes.
And so a lot of my process was, okay, I'm that person. I don't know you. And maybe I wouldn't even go into that place where you're speaking, but I want to know that my story isn't hopeless. And so that's the angle that I took as I took I took the chapters and the things that you were saying and tried to shape it in a way that a reader who had no context and didn't know you at all could digest. That gave you credibility. Why should I listen to this guy? Because people that hear you speak probably know how they got in the room and know how you got into the room. And that's not something that a reader necessarily automatically knows.
Yeah.
They just pick up the book and start reading. So that was a lot of my process, was just being the neutral person who doesn't know you and doesn't know your story. And how does it unfold for me?
And that was such a gift to me, because it's like, I remember telling, like, I don't know this world, and I don't want to take 5 years trying to figure it out.
Sure.
And I think one of the funnier moments to me, I don't know if it was funny to you, is to me is like I remember going back and reading some of the first chapters we were working on, and like I would see the chapter that you wrote, and then I'd go back and look at the chapter I wrote.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, there's like 1,000, 1,500 words here. Like, there's some good stuff in here. Like, I mean, like I made a really good point that's nowhere in this chapter, right? Like, I was like,
oh yeah, I remember that, and I'm like, oh, it's coming.
Yeah,
it's coming.
Yeah, like, because I remember you saying, well, you can't land the plane every chapter. Like,
sure. Yeah.
It is a chapter, and it's a sermon, but it's not a sermon. Like,
sure,
we have to keep people turning the page, and stay engaged in the story.
Sure.
Which I never writing a book. Like, I didn't know that. I thought, listen, I've got really good content that's going to apply to what I'm saying here.
Which you did.
But it's like, and for me speaking, and I got 30 minutes to take you through the whole journey.
Yep.
Because that's all I got, and then I'll see you next Sunday.
Sure.
Or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that's not how a book reads.
Right. I mean, we could have done it that way, honestly. I mean, there are certainly people that turn blogs and sermon series and things into books where each, it's more like a devotional. It's like, each chapter is self-contained. But with something like The Death of a Dream, there was a long arc and years before you really knew what the death of that dream was going to bring about in your life.
Totally.
And to me, it was important to tell the whole story, and not skip to the end, as tempting as it is. And when you're speaking, you kind of have to, because you only have so much time. Yeah. But you have more time in a book, and so that's kind of where I was like, let's save that for down the road when people have more context and they know you better, and they know more about what. All of the things that led up to you discovering what you did about your purpose,
I love that. And that was so helpful. One of the things I'm happy about, and I want podcast listeners to know, is we're going to be working on a resource we're going to try to put together after the book comes out, where we're going to take a lot of that content that the deeper kind of like, spiritual application type of pieces that made it towards some of the later chapters, but that I really want you to have, because I think it will help you apply certain things, is we want to put together like even like a small group study that will go along with the book, so you could sit down with some of your group of people reading the book and then say, hey, here's some deeper things to jump into biblically or in the process, which I'm excited to have more of that content that we can bring. But that was a an adjustment for me, but once again, like, so great to have a team that you're working with, because I wouldn't have known that, and I don't think we would have the quality product that we have. Yeah,
well, I'm glad you were happy with it, because I think, that speaks to the partnership, that you trusted me and I trusted you, and you were very, open to my ideas, and I appreciated that, because you could have very well been like, look, listen, that's not the chapter I wrote. I want the chapter I wrote. And I would have absolutely gone back and done it your way, because it is ultimately your story. But I really enjoyed the fact that we were able to together make something that neither of us could have done individually, and I think we together made it the best it could be, I feel, and I hope the reader feels that. I believe that it really created a journey for the reader.
Yeah. Here's a dangerous question for me to ask, because you may not have an answer, and then I'll look like a moron.
Go for it. Go for it.
But and it's tough, because it's been over a year, almost a year and a half, since you were working on the book. But are there any moments you can think of as you're going through the process where something about the content that we were working through, I guess, did you have a moment where you were like, wow, this could really help people, as you were working through the content?
I tell you, when it happened, it was the very first chapter in the story of you walking in the ice and rain, and you were as discouraged as you get. And I felt that with you, and that, I have had those moments where you're just like, does any of the stuff that I have spent all this energy pouring out, my soul to do, does any of it even matter? And I just remember, as I told that story, just being like, oh my goodness, yes, this is relatable. This is a story that I can't think of very many people who've lived an authentic life at all who can't go back and say, yeah, I almost gave up at that point, or I did not know what was going to happen next, and that, to me, the vulnerability of being able to recreate that scenario for someone, for you to allow us to really go into the depths of that, and for you to admit there were things in your story that you didn't do perfectly, and there were things in your story that other people didn't do perfectly, and to tell that with grace, but also with authenticity. It was so good for me to be able to be a part of that, because I have seen a lot of scenarios in which people were in that, same situation or similar situation, where other people brought things into their life they never asked for, they never invited. And how do you forgive something like that? And, I could easily fill in the blank of the people in my life that, I'm like, did I really forgive that person for the way that, things shifted after my encounters with them or whatever? And that was, of course, very relatable to anybody who's been hurt, been disappointed. And so definitely, there were so many relatable moments. And, we've said it a few minutes ago that our dads were both pastors, and that's a unique world. And there's a lot of unique expectation. And even the way that you work, I could relate to. And I think that's why I could speak into you with a different voice than I could if I hadn't experienced, living in that world, with my dad, the pastor, and the expectations of myself and of maybe other people on what you should be doing as a pastor's kid versus the other kids, and there's a extra filter, I think, of hard on yourselfness, that comes with that. And I think your similar upbringing allowed me to say, hey, I get that, I get that you're frustrated with yourself, or I get that you're, you're going to be, self-defecating a little bit or deprecating. Deprecating.
Yeah.
It's definitely deprecating.
Yes, it is.
Sorry about that. To be able to balance authenticity with being rough on yourself, because you did what the best you could do in the situations that you were in as a kid, and you were making of your life what you thought was the best thing that you could make of it, and to have that grace for you was very easy, because I could relate so much to so many of the, the parts of your story that involved how we deal with other people and how we're viewed by other people, because I had similar struggles.
Well, thanks for saying that. You didn't make me look like a moron. Appreciate it.
I didn't. Yeah, because you're not a moron. But there's that PK in there saying, I'm a moron.
Yes.
I'm afraid of being a moron.
That's true. But I think hearing that is important to me because, as we were working through this, people were like, well, it's like, is this like book like a memoir or whatever? And I'm like, no, to me, like, I don't feel like I was writing like a memoir. For me, I was like, what I know is that I've not talked to anybody that's probably at least 17 years old that hasn't experienced the death of a dream in some type.
Sure.
And sadly, too many of them are still stuck in the death of that dream. Mm-hmm. They're stuck in the identity that they failed. They're stuck in the identity that they're a victim. They're stuck in the pain of that. Or they've chased after some other dream that is not what God was actually inviting them into.
Sure.
And for me, like, is the book about my story? Yes. But I want the book to be read and experienced as all of our story that God is redeeming.
Absolutely.
And, and that's my heart behind it. And I hope as people read it and that they can relate to me, but find themselves, in the resurrection of their purpose as they turn the pages.
Absolutely. And I think I do, that would be my one hope, is that when somebody's reading your story, that it's their story too in some way. And I think because I felt that when I was reading it, that it was in many ways my story, keeping in mind the boundary of like, I can't write my story. I have to write yours and your experiences. But
there was that one part in chapter 18 or 16 where you were like, and so there I was with that dress on. I was like, wait a second.
Wait, that was me? Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I never had a pony.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. There were definitely moments in during the writing of your story where I was like, I think I probably need to write mine because, it's very easy when we have lived kind of some parallel situations that, it was very easy to think how I needed to hash that part of my story out, and I've done that. I've actually, since writing your story, started writing, how that kind of same vein of thinking happened and played out in my own, story. So I in many ways, I think probably helping you write your story reminded me, you know what, you need to keep documenting your own and so that you can keep it separate and not project it onto other people's stories that you're trying to write.
Keep it separate, but maybe the world needs to read that book too. Well,
one would hope. And that's where, it's very easy for me to tell you that you need to write your story and that it's valid. And if one person reads it, that it's enough. It's another thing to believe it for myself. And so hearing you say that, that mattered to you, that it was important enough of a process for you to go through for one person, it's reminding me to do the same. So,
well, I think it comes full circle.
Exactly.
If you gave me hope in life to create this, and somehow in this process, it possibly gives you the impetus, the spark, to put your story out there for the world. I feel like we have helped each other and hopefully the world in some great fashion.
One can hope, yeah. But it is so much easier to believe it about other people than for yourself. And I would say that to whoever's listening as well.
Yeah.
That you can say, oh, that's great that Daron did it, but I shouldn't for some reason. And
it never stops. I mean, I remember like when these first showed up at my house, like the first 500 copies, I was like, this is like, and I started giving it to some people. Mm-hmm. It dawned on me that, because I didn't, work with a massive national, global publishing house with a team of editors that were like, you can't say it that way. Change this, right? Like, we won't make any money if you don't, whatever. Yeah. The cool part was the freedom. It was like, I said whatever I wanted and whatever you wrote, and we went back forth. And like, that was the great part. After we got the majority of it done, to sit back down and be like, no, like, I don't like this here. Put that there. Change this order. And what you don't know is that I made a couple edits after you didn't touch it.
I think you did mention that. That's okay. Yeah,
but
as you should.
Nothing massive. Just changing, a few of the orders of different things. But I didn't have to clear everything through a ton of people's hands. But the negative part of that is I remember having the book and giving it to people and me realizing, okay, wait a second. I've read this. And Emily's read it, and she thought it was pretty good. And then the editor that, put the commas where they're supposed to go, I mean, she read it to edit it. I don't know that she read it. I mean, she was finding where periods go, but I'm like, this
better be good.
This could really suck. And no one has read it except 2 or 3 people on the planet. And I'm like, and now it's in print and I'm giving it to people. And it was this kind of super vulnerable, weird, kind of naked before the world moment of wait, I just jumped into this thing and we did it. But I'm like, this is my life. I wrote about my life, and it's real and difficult. And I'm admitting failures and embarrassing things that, from my perspective that there's a lot of people in the world that don't know those parts of the story.
Yeah.
Even talking about it right now, I'm like, what do we do? Let's burn these, and so I think that's that part of it, is that sense of being able to be courageously vulnerable. I guess it doesn't really ever stop in some ways.
It does not. And you know what you're describing right now is the reason why a lot of people never finish. Because when you say that you're done, it means it's good enough. And it is, but a lot of people just want to say, well, I'm still working on it. And that protects you from saying, this is the best effort that I can do to tell my story, and I'm good with it. And that takes a great jump from starting it, to be able to stop working on it and to say, it's good, And I think that is probably one of the things for me as a writer that I had to learn to do. I could start things all day long and I could tweak them until it was probably getting worse before, and I'm saying I had tweaked it so many, I have files and files and files of things that I have started, and I have edited the absolute life out of them. But I've never shown them to anybody because I would have to then admit, this is an effort that I did my best on.
Yeah.
Because if it wasn't good enough for someone, then it was somehow a reflection on me.
Yeah.
And I think as a creative person who has to finish things, my livelihood depends on landing the plane, and to live with the reality that done is a really important thing, and it's better than perfect. Because done helps somebody get your story into their hands, and perfect means you're never going to get that thing in print and hand it to someone.
Wow, that's beautiful. And in the process of working in as a team helped me because I'm a great starter, terrible finisher as well. And to get it started and get it going, but then it was we set a goal. We're going to be done by July. This is when it's going to happen. We're going to and maybe it's the fact that I don't have a lot of attention to detail, but and maybe it was just that I knew I had done my best to what this was. Right. And when you said I did my best, and we both went, this is good. Yeah. And I think there was a part of it for me where my greatest passion is for the impact it can make on someone else's life. Even if they read it and go, he probably could have done better at this. Or, I was reading through the other day with someone and I realized at the end of it, I didn't do any on the formatting, I didn't do any the cool little box pop out quote things and those little things, formatting things where I'm like, dang it, that have made it better. You know what I mean? But I didn't know. And but maybe we can do that in the future, but those little things where you start tweaking it. But I think is having the confidence that you were helping me. The process of going through it is, we helped each other say, listen, we're going to do our best and we're going to finish it, because the impact is not it being perfect. Like you said, it's being done and getting into people's hands. And so that's the behind the scenes story of how we created this book. And Emily, I hope that you write your own story, but more than that, I hope that this is just the first of a ton of projects that we get to work on together. It was an absolute joy. You're an amazing professional, and I just means the world to me that you could take my story and help create what this is and hopefully what it'll be for people. And so I thank you a million times over, and it was an absolute joy, and let's do it again in 24 months.
Great. Well, thank you. I am very, very grateful that I got to be the one to do it. And it was important to me to create safe space And I'm glad that you're happy with the process and that it was a joyful process, because, it is going to help people. There's no doubt.
Thank you, Emily. Listen, get the book. If it's before October 18th, you can still pre-order it at barnesandnoble.com. If it's after October 18th, just get it wherever you get your books. And if you like it, it would be amazing if you would go online and leave a review. If you read it and you think it sucks, listen, you just keep that opinion to yourself. You know what I mean? No one needs...
Send emails.
Yeah, send me an email. Say, I think it's terrible,
Darren. Review it for next time.
Yeah, and if you didn't like something, it was really offensive, and you were like, I want my money back, that's probably something that Emily came up with. And,
Sure, and I'm just going to apologize now. I'm so sorry.
Just kidding. Listen, I appreciate you guys downloading this episode. It means the world to me that you're part of this podcast community. I would love to hear from you. You can always email me, Daron at blackbirdmission.com. You can text me, 317-550-5070, or obviously on all the socials. Just reach out. And appreciate you download this episode. Thank you to Emily Sutherland for joining me for two episodes in this series. And until we talk to you again, remember these three things. God's for you. He's not against you. He's near you. He's not far away. And he's created you on purpose and for a purpose. We'll talk to you next time on the Daron Earlewine Podcast.